In the polarized halls of the U.S. Congress, where decorum masks tension, Representative Jasmine Crockett faces off with Senator John Kennedy in a moment that no one sees coming. Amid heated debate and veiled condescension, she delivers a single sentence that echoes across the chamber and beyond. What follows is a chain of political, personal, and cultural consequences that none of them could predict. This is a story about courage, authenticity, and how one moment can redefine everything. Capitol smelled of old carpet and fresh coffee, the usual scent of early hearings. Representative Jasmine Crockett adjusted her blazer, eyes scanning the crowded room. It was another day of oversight, another round of performative questions. But something in the air felt off, a tension she couldn't quite name. Across the room, Senator John Kennedy leaned back in his chair, half smirking. He was known for his folksy charm masking sharp jabs. Today, he had a folder thick with papers and a plan to push boundaries. He always did when the cameras were rolling. Crockett had faced worse, but this time felt different. The hearing was about federal oversight and ethics in justice enforcement. Dry, at first glance, but beneath the surface were layers of coded rhetoric and subtle digs. Crockett knew the game. She wasn't there to play it. She was there to break it. The moderator called the room to order. Microphones clicked on. Kennedy cleared his throat. "I've just got a simple question for the Congresswoman," he said, drawing out the southern drawl. Crockett sat still, spine straight, hands folded. She knew this was no simple question. "Not today." Senator Kennedy leaned forward, eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. "Do you believe justice is blind, Congresswoman?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with challenge. The room quieted. Crockett tilted her head slightly, aware of the trap beneath the simplicity of the question. "I believe justice should be blind," she replied, measured. "But too often, it's just looking the other way." A few aides glanced up from their notes. Kennedy smiled, but not kindly. He flipped a page in his folder, scanning for something. An excerpt, a quote, an opening. He brought up a past statement of hers, one taken out of context. "You once said the system was designed to fail people who look like you. Do you still believe that?" It wasn't a question. It was bait. The kind that made headlines. The kind designed to rattle. Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned in, locking eyes with him. "Yes," she said, "and you prove it every time you speak over me." A wave of silence hit the chamber. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Kennedy blinked, but said nothing. The room had changed. The silence after Jasmine's words wasn't empty. It was charged. Staffers stopped typing. A reporter in the back slowly lowered his phone, eyes wide. Even the moderator seemed unsure whether to speak or let the silence stretch longer. Crockett had cut deeper than anyone expected. Kennedy shifted in his seat. His confidence cracked, but not gone. "With all due respect," he said slowly, "I don't appreciate being accused of." She cut in gently, but firmly. "I didn't accuse. I observed." Her voice was low, deliberate. The distinction landed hard. Cameras caught every flicker of expression on Kennedy's face. A brief flash of surprise, then calculation. This wasn't the exchange he wanted. Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted him. She had simply spoken a truth, plainly and publicly. That was more dangerous than anger. Outside the chamber, the clip began circulating within minutes. Political Twitter lit up. Pundits scrambled for takes. But inside, the mood had shifted. The hearing was no longer a routine performance. It was something else now, something raw, unscripted, and suddenly very real. By the time the hearing adjourned, the moment had already gone viral. News outlets cut mid-segment to replay the clip. On one side, Crockett's calm defiance was hailed as bold truth-telling. On the other, it was painted as disrespect. She hadn't meant to spark a movement, not yet. Walking through the marble corridors of the Capitol, Crockett could feel the stares. Some nodded subtly in support. Others avoided eye contact. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from constituents, colleagues, activists. Some simply said, "Thank you." Later that day, a junior staffer handed her a printed transcript of the exchange. Jasmine read it slowly, not for accuracy, but for tone. Did I go too far? She wondered. But deep down, she knew she hadn't. She had only said what too many were too afraid to. Meanwhile, Kennedy appeared on a cable segment that evening. He smiled and dismissed the moment as a misunderstanding. But his eyes flickered as the host replayed the clip. Something in his posture had changed, just slightly. He knew it hadn't gone his way. The next morning, Crockett was called into a closed-door meeting with party leadership. She expected rebuke. Instead, she found a room of careful faces, unsure whether to praise or caution her. "The optics are intense," one senior aide said. "But effective," another added. Crockett sat still, waiting. A seasoned congresswoman finally broke the tension. "You said what many of us feel, but don't dare say." There was a long pause. "But this moment, it's bigger than you now. Be careful." Jasmine nodded, understanding the weight behind the warning. Afterward, she walked alone to her office. Outside, a small group of young activists had gathered. One held a sign that read, "Truth isn't disrespect." She smiled faintly. She hadn't set out to lead anything. But sometimes, leadership finds you in a sentence. Inside, her staff was already flooded with interview requests. She declined them all for now. This wasn't about going on a media tour. It was about staying grounded. There was still work to do, and the blowback, she knew, hadn't even begun. That afternoon, in a quiet Senate office, Kennedy met with his advisors. "We can't let this define the session," one said. "She's turning it into a symbol." Kennedy frowned. He hadn't anticipated this much fallout. "It was one sentence," he muttered. "How the hell did that happen?" They discussed strategy, deflection, reframing, subtle attacks. But nothing felt solid. Crockett hadn't attacked him personally. She'd exposed a system. And that was harder to fight. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't angry. She had just spoken. A younger aide finally said it. People believed her because she wasn't playing politics. She meant it. Kennedy didn't respond. He stood at the window, watching the Capitol lawn. He wasn't used to losing the narrative, especially not to someone so composed. Meanwhile, a journalist published an op-ed titled "The Sentence That Shook the Hill." It wasn't just a quote. It was becoming a moment. And in Washington, moments had power. The kind that didn't fade by Monday morning. That evening, Jasmine called her father. He'd marched in the 60s. He knew what it meant to stand alone in a room full of power. "I saw the clip," he said before she spoke. "You were calm, clear. You made him listen." She exhaled slowly. "Did I do the right thing?" There was silence. Then, right doesn't always mean safe. "But it's still right." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. That call gave her more strength than any headline. Sometimes the hardest part isn't speaking truth. It's living with what comes after dot at home. She turned off the news. The coverage was relentless. She made tea, sat in silence. The weight of the day hit her. Not regret, but gravity. She'd started something. Now she had to carry it. Outside, protesters and supporters began to mix. Some showed up with signs. Others just stood in quiet solidarity. A shift was happening. Not a revolution, but something real. Something human. And Crockett felt it pressing on her shoulders. 2 days later, Kennedy returned to the Senate floor with a speech. Calm, polished, rehearsed. He didn't mention Crockett by name, but everyone knew. He spoke of decorum, respect, and preserving the dignity of civil discourse. Applause followed, but it felt thin. Crockett watched from her office. "He's trying to flip it," her aide said. "Make it about manners instead." "Of meaning." She nodded. It was predictable and dangerous. If the story became about tone, the truth would be buried under performance. Later that day, she posted a short video. No script. No edits. Just her voice. If speaking the truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's time we ask why. It was quiet, powerful, and by morning, it had millions of views. Commentators debated whether this was the beginning of a new political style. One rooted in sincerity, not spectacle. Crockett didn't care about style. She cared about what was real. And right now, people were listening in a way they hadn't before. With visibility came pressure. Lobbyists, think tanks, party donors, they all had opinions now. "Don't alienate moderates," one advisor warned. "You're becoming polarizing." Crockett listened, but didn't bend. She wasn't playing the game the way they wanted. She started receiving threats, mostly online, some mailed. Her staff doubled security. Still, she came to work each day, spoke to constituents, kept moving. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about what her voice had unlocked. In others' in committee meetings, her presence carried new weight. Some looked at her with admiration, others with guarded hostility, but no one ignored her anymore. That in itself was a shift. A woman who had once been dismissed was now being studied and feared. At home, she found herself rereading old journals. Reminders of why she started. Not for sound bites. Not for praise, but for justice. That word, so often weaponized, sanitized, still meant something to her. She just had to keep it close. 1 week after the hearing, a new bill was introduced. Quietly, but with intent. It limited the scope of ethics investigations in federal agencies. Crockett read it twice. It was retaliation wrapped in procedure. And she wouldn't let it pass unnoticed. She called a press conference. Not grandstanding, just facts. She explained what the bill would do, who it would shield, and why it mattered. She made no mention of Kennedy. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. Her colleagues watched closely. Some joined her. Others hesitated, worried about political fallout. But momentum had started to build. Young voters, activists, even retired officials were speaking out. The story had become a symbol. Symbols are hard to legislate away. That night, Jasmine walked past the Capitol steps alone. The city was quiet. The sentence she'd spoken still echoed, not in volume, but in consequence. And in the weeks ahead, that echo would either fade or become something far louder. Inside Capitol offices, conversations shifted. Young staffers cited Jasmine in private debates. A few representatives rewrote speeches, careful to sound more grounded, less rehearsed. She hadn't just spoken. She'd exposed how fake things had become. A moderate congressman from another state quietly thanked her in the hallway. "You said what a lot of us think when the cameras are off." It wasn't an alliance, but it was a crack in the wall. Crockett took note. Change never starts loud. It starts with pressure. Meanwhile, Kennedy doubled down in interviews, defending civility as the cornerstone of democracy. But each appearance seemed less convincing. When pressed on Crockett's sentence, he deflected. He could quote policy, but he couldn't answer why she said it. For the first time in his career, Kennedy looked out of step. And in D.C., perception is power. His grip was loosening, not because of scandal, but because of relevance. Something was moving, and it wasn't moving with him. Back in her district, Jasmine visited a local college for a Q&A. The room was packed. Students didn't ask about politics. They asked about voice, about fear, about what it meant to speak up when no one expects you to. You don't have to shout to be heard, she told them. But you do have to mean every word you say. After the event, a girl waited behind to say thank you. I want to run someday. Seeing you made me feel like maybe I can. That night, Jasmine sat on her porch with her campaign manager. It's getting bigger, he said. We could ride this, push it further. She shook her head. We don't ride moments. We respect them, or they burn out. He nodded. That was the difference. She wasn't here for waves. She was here to shift the tide. 2 weeks after the hearing, a conservative PAC launched an ad campaign. It clipped her sentence out of context, pairing it with dramatic music and claims of division. It ran in swing districts. The intent was clear: silence her through distortion. But this time, the internet pushed back. Side-by-side clips, full transcripts, and fact-checks trended faster than the ad itself. Younger voters weren't falling for edits anymore. They wanted substance. They wanted uncut footage. Crockett responded not with fire, but with clarity. She released a 3-minute video explaining the context. Calm, direct, no theatrics. If telling the truth offends power, maybe we need to redefine what power should be. The ad campaign fizzled. It did what attack ads fear most. It backfired. People weren't just defending Jasmine. They were claiming her sentence as their own. In private, Kennedy vented to aides. She's made herself untouchable, he muttered. You call her out, you're attacking integrity. You stay silent, you're complicit. The room stayed quiet. They had no answers. The playbook wasn't working. Meanwhile, Crockett began drafting a proposal, a bipartisan ethics oversight expansion. It was ambitious, unlikely to pass, but it wasn't about the vote. It was about forcing hands, revealing who stood where. A few colleagues advised her to wait. Don't push too soon. But she knew timing mattered less than consistency. If her sentence had meaning, it had to live beyond that day. Otherwise, it would become just another viral moment, and she wouldn't allow that. At the next hearing, she presented the outline herself. No frills, just policy, a few eyebrows raised. The woman with the sharp sentence had brought a sharper solution. The day the bill was formally introduced, Crockett stood alone behind the podium. No grand crowd. Just her, a mic, and 2 folders. One for the press, one for history. This isn't about punishment, she said. It's about protection. Of truth, of trust, of those who serve and those who are served. The words weren't viral, but they were solid, grounded, meant to last. Later that night, a late show host praised her. She didn't just drop the mic. She picked it back up and got to work. It was meant as a joke, but it felt true. The sentence had been a spark. Now, she was building something real with it. Support began to trickle in. Not a wave, but enough to mark a shift. Enough to make Kennedy nervous. With the bill in committee, pressure mounted. Lobbyists whispered. Emails flew. Some tried to water it down. Others tried to bury it. But Crockett stayed firm. Every edit was a line in the sand. She made personal. Visits to undecided lawmakers. No scripts. Just her, a chair, and the facts. Some changed their minds. Others didn't. But all of them listened. Because she'd earned that, not through charm, but truth. Kennedy, meanwhile, lobbied quietly against the bill. He never spoke her name, but every argument he made carried its shadow. He was losing ground, and he knew it. As the vote date neared, Crockett felt the weight, not fear, responsibility. She hadn't asked to carry this banner, but now that it was in her hands, she wouldn't drop it. The House floor was tense the morning of the debate. Crockett sat with her notes, watching the room shift. Supporters of the bill spoke first, measured, hopeful. Opponents followed. Dismissive, defensive. Then Jasmine stood. I didn't plan to become a symbol. I didn't want a headline. But I spoke a sentence that revealed something we don't like to admit. This place listens more to comfort than to conscience. Silence again. That kind. The same kind she'd felt that day with Kennedy. She let it hang before finishing. We owe the people more than performance. We owe them honesty. She sat down. No applause, just stillness. And in that stillness, truth echoed again. The vote was closer than expected. Eyes flicked to the screen as numbers rolled in. Crockett didn't watch. She sat still, hands folded. Her staff held their breath. Passed by 2 votes. The room didn't erupt. It barely reacted. But Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. Not pride, not victory, something quieter. Like resolve settling into bone. Reporters rushed to her afterward. Any words for your critics? One asked. She smiled softly. I already gave them one. Outside, the sun had dipped behind the dome. She walked out alone. No parade, no speech. Just another step forward. The bill moved to the Senate with less momentum, but more attention. Kennedy delayed a statement. Eventually, he said he would review the language. But his voice no longer set the tone. Crockett's influence grew, not through party ranks, but through public trust. She began mentoring junior members. Not with lectures, with listening. The sentence had become more than a moment. It was now a lesson, in restraint, in truth, in what happens when someone speaks plainly in a place built on performance. She didn't seek power. But real power, it turns out, often finds those who don't chase it. Months later, a young congresswoman, in her first committee hearing, quoted Crockett's sentence. Not as a slogan, as a foundation. She said it softly, deliberately, and the room went quiet again. That same kind of silence that Jasmine watched the clip on her phone. She didn't smile. She just nodded. The sentence had traveled beyond the sea. Moment, beyond the chamber, into others who now carried it to. In politics, legacies aren't always written in laws. Sometimes they're etched in courage. In a moment no one plans. In a sentence no one forgets. And somewhere in the Capitol, another room went silent. After the House victory, Senate committees stalled the bill. Lobbyists intensified their efforts, calling in favors, pressuring moderates. Jasmine knew the Senate was a different battlefield. Quiet, slower, sharper. Still, her influence lingered. Journalists began referring to similar moments as Crockett echoes. Calm, pointed truths dropped in tense rooms. Not everyone liked that. Some saw her as disruptive, unpredictable. Meanwhile, Kennedy's presence diminished. He spoke less, avoided confrontations. He had learned, painfully, that one sentence could reshape a narrative he'd controlled for decades. Jasmine wasn't celebrating. She was strategizing. The next steps weren't about making noise. They were about proving she could sustain a movement without spectacle. Inside the Capitol, a quiet alliance began forming. Women from both parties, young and mid-career. They weren't organizing officially. They were just listening to each other more. Crockett met with several of them behind closed doors. This isn't about me, she said. It's about building space where honesty isn't punished. Heads nodded. No one recorded. No one leaked. It was the kind of political moment that didn't show up on C-SPAN, but mattered more. Trust between people, in a place that rarely allowed it. And while Kennedy lobbied the old way, pressure, tradition, hierarchy, Jasmine was working with something he couldn't see. Momentum born from sincerity. Late one night, a memo leaked. It showed coordinated efforts to block Crockett's bill, not on merit, but strategy. Senators were told to avoid debate and stall for optics. The press got it first, then the public, and then Jasmine. She read it 3 times. There. Not even hiding it anymore, her aide said. Jasmine just nodded. They never were. She issued a brief response. The rules are only sacred when they protect power. When they threaten it, they're bent. It wasn't a call-out. It was a truth. Again, social media lit up. But Jasmine stayed quiet. Let the words do the work. Back home in Texas, Jasmine visited a courthouse she once worked in. The same halls, where she'd seen justice fail people who looked like her. The same air. The same feeling. She met with community leaders, local journalists, old friends. None wanted photo ops. They wanted updates. What happens if they kill the bill? One asked. Then we write a better one, she said. And we bring more. People with us next time. The answer wasn't fiery. It was steady, grounded, like everything she'd become. That night, her father grilled fish while the neighborhood kids ran through the yard. This is why you keep going, he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. When the Senate finally took up the bill, the room felt colder. Jasmine sat in the gallery, quiet, watching. She wasn't allowed to speak here. But her presence said enough. One senator, a veteran, rose to oppose it. This bill is rooted in division, he said. It seeks to punish rather than unify. Jasmine tilted her head. Same tactics, different face. Then, something unexpected. A young Republican stood and said, Actually, I read the bill. It's fair, and we owe the public transparency. Gasps followed. No one expected that. Jasmine closed her eyes for a second. Not from relief, from restraint. Because real progress doesn't shout. It walks, one step at a time. Just before the final vote, a procedural motion delayed everything. A classic move, designed to drain momentum. Some staffers smirked. They thought she'd get tired. Move on. But Jasmine had already expected this. She wasn't building for a win. She was building for permanence. Let them stall, she told. Her team. We're not moving backward. Supporters outside the Capitol organized vigils, teach-ins, and town halls. The story wasn't just in D.C. anymore. It was national. Personal. Local. Kennedy avoided public comment. But behind closed doors, he was pressing hard. Because if this passed, it would signal something worse than defeat. Irrelevance. An old case from Jasmine's attorney days resurfaced. A client, one she defended pro bono, had been released early and reoffended. Media outlets pounced. This is who she protects, read one headline. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. The goal wasn't facts. It was framing. Undermine her integrity. Cast doubt on her judgment. Jasmine addressed it with a single sentence. Every system fails when we treat symptoms instead of causes. It didn't erase the narrative, but it reminded people of the bigger truth. Still, the attacks hurt. They always did. But this time, she didn't retreat. She showed up. Same meetings. Same mission. Late nights turned into early mornings. Crockett's team noticed the toll. She skipped meals, canceled personal trips. You can't carry all of it alone, one aide told her. I know, she said, but she didn't stop. Because somewhere deep inside, she believed this wasn't just policy. It was about shifting the standard. For how people lead, friends grew concerned. You need to rest, they urged. She smiled, grateful, but rest felt like privilege. And she wasn't ready to slow down while the old guard was still standing. So she kept walking, through fatigue, through doubt, through noise. Another senator flipped, quietly, without announcement, but it changed the math. Suddenly, the bill had a path, slim but real. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She scheduled more meetings, pressed harder, because she knew something. Now, victories don't arrive. You drag them across the finish line, bruised and limping. Behind the scenes, Kennedy's camp began floating compromise amendments. Soft language. Delays. She read them all. They're trying to gut it without killing it, she said, and she refused. We're not watering it down, not this time. On the eve of the vote, a national town hall aired. Jasmine appeared alongside. Opponents of the bill. Tense. Civil. Honest. The audience was split, unsure what to believe. But when asked what she hoped to gain, she answered simply, I don't want power. I want accountability. That sentence landed like thunder. Not because it was loud, but because it was rare. The next morning, major newspapers ran variations of the same headline. She's not playing the game, and for once that was seen. As strength. The vote was scheduled. The floor was set. Now, all she had to do was hold the line. This time, the Senate floor was full. No delays, no tricks. Jasmine watched from the gallery, still composed. Her heart raced, but she didn't show. Senators spoke, but it was clear. The air had shifted. The public was watching. They weren't just hearing arguments. They were weighing character. The final tally came slowly, one by one, each vote like a stone dropping in water. When the last yay echoed, the room didn't cheer, but Jasmine's eyes WELLED dotted it past. Not just a bill, but a moment. Of proof. That decency, done right, could still change the rules. The streets outside erupted. Not wild celebration, but hopeful, tearful relief. People hugged, called friends. Teachers replayed the vote in classrooms. It mattered. Kennedy issued a cold statement. The Senate has spoken. Time will judge this vote. No mention of Jasmine. No congratulations. Just Distance. Cable News asked, is this the start of a new political era? Others dismissed it as a one-off. But online, people called it the sentence effect. Jasmine didn't appear in public that day. She sat alone, read messages from strangers. One read, for the first time, I believe again. Passing the bill wasn't the end. It was the start of backlash. Several states filed legal challenges. Think tanks mobilized talking points. One senator vowed to repeal it in the next Congress. Crockett expected this. She'd written contingency plans, started training staff on next steps. Because truth, when codified, doesn't end debate. It intensifies it. Still, she took a moment to breathe. She called her mother. They didn't say much. Just sat on the line quiet. Sometimes silence means peace. And then she went back to work. She didn't want to go, but her team insisted. An award from a national civil rights organization. Black tie. Televised. She wore blue. Simple. Grounded. The speech was short. This isn't about winning. It's about remembering who we serve. People stood. But Jasmine didn't smile. She looked out and thought of all who weren't in that room, who never got applause, but carried the same courage. Afterward, a teenager approached her. You didn't try to be perfect. You were just honest. Jasmine touched her shoulder. That's the only thing I know how to be. Months later, Kennedy announced he wouldn't seek re-election. The press speculated everything. Pressure, polling, fatigue. But those close to him knew the truth. He was tired. Not of politics, but of losing control. The narrative had moved beyond him. The sentence still haunted him. Not because it attacked, but because it revealed. He gave no farewell speech. Just a press release. Jasmine read it in silence. The game's changing, her aide said. You changed it. But she shook her head. The people did. I just spoke when it was time. The next election cycle brought a wave of young, policy-driven candidates. Many cited Crockett as inspiration, not for her fame, but her discipline, her refusal to bend. In the Capitol, she began mentoring them, quietly, No headlines. Just late-night coffee meetings, honest advice, and reminders that one sentence doesn't build a legacy. Showing up does. Some faltered. Others rose fast. But all of them remembered the silence Jasmine once created in that hearing, and how it made them believe they could do the same. With visibility came danger. Threats increased. Her office received daily hate. Some told her to stop speaking, to stay quiet, to step back. Jasmine hired more security, but she didn't flinch. Fear doesn't get to rewrite my mission, she told the press. It just proves why it matters. One night, walking to her car, she paused. A note had been left on the windshield. No threats, just 4 words. Don't let them win. She didn't know who left it, but she folded it carefully and kept it in her wallet. A year later, she visited the exact room where it all began. The hearing room. Same chairs, same acoustics, same echo. But something inside her had shifted. She sat in the chair again. Not to reenact, just to remember. What it felt like to say something real in a place built to avoid it. A janitor passed and nodded. You changed the air in here. Jasmine smiled. Sometimes the air needed to change. She left the room quietly. But that room would never be the same. Universities studied the hearing in civics classes. Documentaries were made. Podcasts dissected the sentence, the vote, the aftermath. Everyone tried to name the movement. But Jasmine didn't. Movements don't need names, she told a reporter. They need people, awake, ready, honest. And people were? Not because she told them to be, but because they saw her do it first. And that kind of leadership doesn't end when the news cycle does. It loves. In conversations. In courage. In the refusal to accept the script. Years later, during a new committee hearing, a freshman representative responded to a provocation with calm, deliberate precision. Just a sentence. Clear, bold, real. The room fell silent. Again, different cast, same story. Jasmine watched from her office, now a senior leader, and smiled. That's how it begins, she whispered, because it wasn't about her anymore. It was about what comes after, when truth becomes tradition, and courage is no longer rare. One sentence can't change the world, but it can change the room. And that's where everything begins. Jasmine no longer needed to speak in every meeting. Her presence alone brought weight. Young representatives now came to her not for permission, but perspective. She built a small team solely focused on mentoring, not campaign tips, not media strategy, just how to lead with conscience. You can win and still lose yourself, she reminded them. They called it the chair, her empty seat in a spare office where new reps could sit and think. No phones, no noise, just clarity. People don't follow loudness, she told one mentee. They follow someone who knows when to pause. As her influence grew, so did the resistance. Super PACs funded full campaigns just to unseat her. The messaging was clear. Too radical. Too soft. Too black. Too bold. One ad showed her walking silently, overlaid with fear-driven slogans. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her community did it for her with votes. But even Jasmine had moments of doubt. What if I'm wrong? She asked her father one night. He answered simply, wrong doesn't echo like truth. She kept going. Not because it was easy, but because quitting would mean they'd won. In a rare interview, John Kennedy finally reflected on the confrontation. She said something I didn't expect, and it stuck. He didn't apologize, but he acknowledged. Washington has always needed its firebrands, he said. But she was different. She didn't yell. She cut clean. That quote alone made headlines. Jasmine didn't comment. When asked by reporters, she replied, some truths don't need revisiting. They just need respecting. And somehow, That said more than any press release ever could. Invited to speak at the European Parliament, Jasmine addressed a packed room on political ethics. She didn't talk about bills or votes. She told a story. "I once silenced a room with a sentence," she said. "But it wasn't because I was loud. It was because they finally listened." Afterward, members from 5 countries asked for copies of her remarks. One delegate said, "You reminded us that power isn't always volume. Sometimes it's vision." The moment wasn't viral. It was quiet. But globally, something shifted. At a Sunday lunch, her niece asked, "TIA, are you famous?" Jasmine smiled. "Only to people who care about boring government stuff." But she knew the truth. Her family now bore the weight of visibility. Every move was watched. Every holiday could be disrupted by cameras or critics. Still, they protected her. Her mother refused interviews. Her father hung a framed photo of that hearing, but only in the garage. "She's our Jasmine, not theirs," he said. And Jasmine never forgot that behind her public armor lived a private heart, constantly held by those who knew her first. With her first bill law, Jasmine turned to its sequel, focused on judicial ethics and transparency. Harder, messier, riskier, but vital. This time, opposition came faster. Judges lobbied. Bar associations warned her to tread carefully. She didn't flinch. "Careful doesn't clean corruption," she told her staff. Hearings resumed. Testimonies were tense. But Jasmine had learned, don't attack, illuminate. Let the facts shame the system. And slowly, support grew. Not from fear, from fatigue. People were tired of pretending the system policed itself. Exhaustion came like a thief, not loud, but constant. Jasmine stopped sleeping through the night. Her voice cracked during speeches. She snapped at her closest aides. "You need to step back," they told her. Even lion sleep. She took 1 week. Alone, no press, no phone, just walks, water, and a journal. She didn't find answers, but she found breath. When she returned, she said something no one expected. "I'm not trying to save everything anymore. I'm just doing what I can." Well, and it changed her. Softer, but sharper. Stronger, not harder. On the 5th anniversary of the original hearing, Congress voted on a bill named after her, the Crockett Civic Standards Act. It was largely symbolic, codifying rules of conduct and transparency. Some mocked it. Others embraced it. But no one ignored it. As the vote passed, Jasmine sat silently. Her aide whispered, "How does it feel?" She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "It's not about my name on a bill. It's about my name reminding people how to behave." A high school student went viral after testifying before a local board. When questioned aggressively, she replied calmly, "I'm not here to perform. I'm here to participate." The clip exploded. Journalists dubbed it a Jasmine moment. Crockett saw it days later. She watched the clip twice, then smiled. Not from pride, from peace, because the point was never the spotlight. It was the spark. And it had clearly spread. In a quiet interview, Jasmine was asked what she'd say to her younger self on that first day in Congress. She thought long. Finally, she answered, "Say less. Listen longer. And when you speak, make it count." The host smiled. "One sentence?" "1 sentence," Jasmine confirmed, because after all the noise, the legacy, the battles, it still came down to that. Years after that single sentence echoed through Congress, Jasmine Crockett stood once again in the same hearing room. But this time, it was filled with young leaders, some of them her mentees, ready to carry the torch. The room hummed with possibility, not tension. The weight of history was present, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like a foundation, a place where truth had planted its roots. She didn't speak first. She simply watched, listened, and smiled quietly. Because she knew the real revolution wasn't in loud speeches or viral moments. It was in the quiet power of persistence, the courage to speak truth even when no one asked for it. And in that silence, the world shifted one sentence at a time.